My name is Marian Lampl.
Wonderful. So the first question that we have for you today, Marian, is when did you move to Greenhills?
In 1938.
And then how old were you then in 1938?
5 years old.
5 years old. So then your whole family moved together in 1938?
Yes.
Do you know where your family lived before they moved to Greenhills?
We lived on Daly Road. I think that would be the post office of Mount Healthy.
Okay. And do you know why they decided to move to Greenhills as opposed to being in Mount Healthy?
I don't remember a conscious question about it, but I know that my dad wanted to try something different. He had been a milkman, and we moved into the farm area at Greenhills. And we had probably 2.5, 3 acres. And so he began raising chickens and selling chickens and eggs. And then we had a large garden. So he sold all that too on the farmer's market in Greenhills.
Oh, wonderful. So do you remember at all what your home was like in the farm region in Greenhills?
Oh, yes.
Would you mind telling us about it a little bit?
When we moved there, it was a 4-room house, 2 stories, and it had been clad in wood, painted white, but the weeds were head high all over it. There's ragweeds and elderberry bushes all over the place. So we had to cut all that down before we could even start doing what my dad wanted to do. And it was a house of 2 rooms upstairs and 2 rooms out downstairs. And we had a pump in the kitchen. We had an outhouse, so there was no running water. And then there was this, government had installed a system of rainwater off the roof and through a charcoal filter and into a cistern. So that's what we pumped into the house, as well as a well we had also.
Wonderful.
And we had no heat. There was no central heat or anything like that. So all the time we lived there, the bedrooms never had heat. And we had a large fireplace in the living room. And I remember when we moved in, it had a chain hanging down with hook on the end. And the first winter we were there, we almost froze to death because that fireplace did not heat very far out. And if you got your front roasted and your back cold. And so we closed that up and we put in a coal burning stove there. And then we put an oil burning stove in the kitchen. Mm. So that's the kind of house we had. Apparently, that house was very, very old. It was brick underneath it, underneath the cladding of the wood on the outside. And they said that it was over 100 years old when we moved in. Mm. So they even said there were holes in it where you could shoot out at Indians, but that we don't know if that was a just wishful thinking on someone's part. But it had, as I said, it had been painted white, but that's the last coat of paint the government put on it. All the time we lived there, and we lived there for, let's see, I was 5, and I graduated from Greenhills in 1950. And I think that it was the whole area was sold probably 2 or 3 years after that. So that's how long we lived there.
So you mentioned that so the government had painted the house and added the filter. Was there anything else that they did in addition to that? Okay.
Nothing.
All right.
In fact, we had to build the chicken houses.
Oh.
And so my dad had just 3 girls, just my 2 sisters and myself. And occasionally my uncle would come because he was a carpenter. But we built chicken houses all over it. And so we learned a lot of self-sufficiency because it was our job to, when we get home from school, we would have to change our clothes, put on our play clothes, go out and feed the chickens, and then come in and do our homework. And then in the summertime, we took care of the vegetable garden, which was sizable. Dad would have it plowed by a nearby farmer, and then he had to then break up all that the clods of earth, and then we'd have to plant it, and then we'd have to water it by hand, carrying buckets of water, and then we would have to weed it. And that we'd always hated to weed because Dad would get after us if we didn't get the roots of the weeds out. My sister would take over the tops off. And so, but my mother canned all that stuff.
So you mentioned your father was sort of the one out in the field. So you said your mother canned. Was there other things, other roles that she had, or other things that she did?
Yes. She also helped him when it was time to dress chickens, which they did in the kitchen of our house. So when we get orders for chickens, and then we had this block in the back, and it had 2 nail holes in it, or 2 nails rather. And you put the head of the chicken in between it, and you chop it off. And then my dad would hand the chickens to us, and we'd have to hold those wings against their bodies so they didn't flap around while they drained the blood drained out of them. Then they take them in the house, and Mom had pails of water boiling on the stove. And then they took that over to the sink, and they dipped the chickens in the water, and that's how you got the feathers off of them. And then he'd have to, take the insides out and all that sort of thing, and they'd have to wrap them up, and then he would deliver them. And sometimes people came to the house and bought them just the way they were. There were a lot of people that did that.
And so you mentioned, so it was your father and your mother, and then you had 3 sisters. And
two sisters.
Oh, two other sisters. So the 3 of you total then?
Mm-hmm.
So did one of you have to, did all 3 of you share a room, or did
all 3 of us shared a room.
Right.
The rooms were fairly large. My sister and I shared a bed, and then my other sister had another bed in the same room.
Did you have a favorite space either in or outside of your home? Did you like to be in your room, or was there a certain area of the farm that you really liked?
Actually, I loved to read, and I would take a pocket full of Ritz crackers, and I'd go out to the woods and sit with my back against the trunk of a tree, and I'd read.
Wonderful. So what different types of activities did you participate in here in Greenhills?
You mean in school?
School, or religious activities or anything like that?
Well, of course, Mom and Dad had on the market days, they would take a table that my dad had built down to market, and that was in back of the shopping center. And then he would have eggs and vegetables for sale there. And while they were doing that, we would be allowed to go to the pool. So those were the days we could go to the pool. But actually, we didn't participate in a whole lot at school because of the fact that we rode the school bus. And but my sister Jean, she was active in the music program. She had a very good voice, and she was in what was known then as the Triple Trio. And they often went to Columbus to participate in. They won quite a few awards doing that. And my sister Alvira, she often participated in sports in the school. And I didn't really do much in that way. I was more of a bookworm, I guess you would say. But whatever, people were not as mobile then as they are now. So whatever we would participate in would take Dad away from what he was doing, and he'd have to take us or pick us up. So we didn't do a lot there. We did occasionally attend the movies that they had in the community building before we were allowed to go to the theaters around town, which were pretty far away, because you have to realize Greenhills was in the middle of farms. And so the surrounding farms were all around, and that was before Winton Woods had been built. I mean, Winton Woods Lake had been built or anything like that. So we were allowed to do that. And then when they had basketball tournaments, we were allowed to go to those. And because we had one of the biggest gyms in the area. Often the tournaments were held in our gyms. I did get involved a lot in art projects, submitting those to contests and things like that. I liked doing that. And also, the school had a really neat home ec department. It was like a little apartment. It had a living room, and had these kitchens that were side by side by side, just like they do now in some of the places that you go to in schools. And then they had a room for sewing. And since my mom sewed a lot, I also did that. And we would we would make our clothes from feed sacks, because we would go to the local feed mill, and at that time they had printed the sacks with materials like your blouse, something like that. And then Mom always wanted Dad to be sure he got a certain number of the same kind, so that she would then have enough material to make a dress or a house coat or shirts or whatever. And we submitted those to the Hamilton County Fair, and so we participated in some of that sort of thing too. We sometimes entered some of our produce into the fair. And then because I was pretty proficient in sewing, I was selected for the Shillito's High School Sewing Board my freshman year at school. And so I participated. That was for a full year. And you would go down to Shillito's, which then became Macy's and that sort of thing. And you went to the head of the yard goods department, and they would help you pick out a pattern. They wanted a variety of clothes that they wanted made for a specific time. And then you could pick out your material, and then you made it over a certain period of time, like a month or 6 weeks. And then they would on a certain Saturday, we would model those clothes through the department. And sometimes we went out to other places to model too, like once we went to the Kenwood Country Club, I remember for that. So that was a real fun project to do. And then one time I did participate in a radio program where it was teams from different schools against each other. And I won a really, really neat handbag. But that's kind of the things that we did.
Yeah, fun. So the this thing that you got to do down at Shillito's, so that you said you started that in high school?
When I was a freshman.
So would you have considered that kind of like a job, or was it more of just like an activity you got to do on the side?
It was an activity I got to do on the side.
But otherwise you would have come home and helped your dad and your sisters?
Yeah.
Wonderful. And so you mentioned the woods, so would you go meet and play with other kids in the woods as well, or did you just like to go because it was quiet and you could read?
Quiet and I could read.
Yeah.
The only time the farms are kind of far apart. Mm. There was a girl on the neighboring farm that I became friends with, well, as long as she lived there, But then we were friends with all the farmers in the neighborhood. I remember there was a farm called Forches, which was down near the water tower, where it is now. And that's where we got our milk, which was not pasteurized at that time. It came from the cow to us. And it was a neat place to go because you could go in a milk house, and they had a big cooler with cool water running through it, and they would pull that out and they would fill your jugs up with it, and you take it back home with you. Then the milk the cream on that would rise to the top, and that's the way whole milk is.
So besides getting to participate sort of in the school, and you mentioned some of these activities like the basketball arena and things like that, were there other locations in the village that you liked to go to?
The drugstore. The drugstore was your quintessential, typical drugstore. It had the round stools that you sat on. It had the fountain, and you could order your sundaes or cones or whatever. And it was a neat place to go to.
Did you also enjoy the library, being the bookworm that you were?
Yeah. Well, there was not a public library there when I was in school. The books were at the library in the building, which is now where the Historical Society is. And that was a really neat room because it had murals all over the walls. It was really the size of 2 rooms classrooms put together with, that's how big it was. And the murals were they were painted according to the times. They're similar to what you would have seen down at Union Station when they were down there, or over at the airport later on. They were all about the industry of the area.
So we've talked a little bit about your sort of like school experience. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about? Any fond memories of elementary school or high schools or anything like that?
The teachers were really great teachers. I can remember of course, all of us were in the one community building, both high school and grade school. The grade school was to the wing to the right, and it was 4 rooms down and 4 rooms up. And when I first started, I was in the school the first year that it opened in the first grade. They didn't have kindergarten at that time. And then our class was the first class that graduated in 1950, went all the way through school. But our teachers were really good. And we were allowed to have animals in pens outside the window of our classroom. And then when we broke for summer, they would send those animals home with me. We had sheep, we had ducks, whatever we happened to be growing in those pens out there. And so that was an interesting thing. And then I remember one of my teachers' name was Miss Harbage. She was a really nice teacher. Miss Lawton also was a good teacher. But then she taught my children. And at that time, they didn't think she was as good a teacher as I thought she was. So I guess there was a difference in generations. But then we had Miss Seward, who was the librarian, and she was she came from the Boston area. She had that clipped accent. And we always thought she was very old and very kind of spindly, And she was, the boys particularly liked to tease her, which wasn't too well. And then Miss Lowe, she was a very good English teacher. And she was a formidable teacher. She would have a ruler in her hand. And if you weren't paying attention, she would crack you across the knuckles with it. And when she couldn't get her point across, she would take her hair and she'd pull it like this straight up. But she was really a good teacher. And I remember once the teachers all got together and they went to see a Van Johnson movie. And they brought back to me, I don't know why it was me, a picture of him signed.
That's awesome.
and so I really enjoyed the teachers that we had at that time. I remember the boys had Mr. Hollister for industrial arts, and they were always teasing that poor man. They would, whenever they were going out on field trips, they would lose him because they didn't have very many cars at that time. Maybe only, there were 20 boys in our class, and probably less than half a dozen would have access to a really old car. But they really liked him, but they liked to tease him a lot.
So you've mentioned you enjoyed your home ec class, but was there any other classes that you really enjoyed?
The art class.
The art class.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that your education here in Greenhills impacted you sort of growing up further in your life as well?
I really would have wanted to go to college. In fact, I did get a scholarship from the school, but I wasn't. My parents were not able to send me on to college, so then I passed it on to the next person who was going to get it. And but all my life, I did want to have a college education, and I finally did do that. When my children were in school, I started back to evening college, and I guess after about 12 years, I finally got a bachelor's degree. So I went to Raymond Walters first and got a associate's degree, and then I went to down to the main campus and got my bachelor's degree, and I graduated with my daughter.
That's special. That's wonderful. What did you do in the meantime? So after you graduated, you stayed with your family here in Greenhills, or?
Well, after I graduated, I went to work for Ohio National Life Insurance Company as a typist, and I typed insurance policies. And I rode with another girl in my class and her parents. They would drop us off pick us up, and occasionally I'd have to take the bus. But that time you have to take the bus down to Knowlton's Corner, and then you have to transfer to a crosstown bus, and then you could get off and walk down to the building. And so I can still remember the streetcars even downtown, although I never did. I always regretted that I never rode on one. But and then going to one thing I forgot, when it was time to go to school each year, my two sisters and I and my mom would take a trip downtown to get our clothes for the year. And we go to all the different stores. We go to Pogues, we go to McAlpin's, we go to Shillito's. We'd have lunch at the Shillito's tea room. And we'd go look at all these clothes, and we'd always end up with material, and we'd end up making the clothes.
You gotta do it yourself.
We did. That was always a fun thing to do. But then after I was a typist, then I got married when I was 19. And my husband had been, he was my classmate also and a fellow farmer. He had been drafted into the Marine Corps during the Korean War. And so we were married, and I went to live in California, in Costa Mesa, California. He was stationed at the El Toro Marine Air Station as a mechanic. And we lived in a converted garage, along with, there were several other garages that this couple from Missouri had converted for the service people to use. And they were really nice. She loved to quilt, and she would often send out some things that she had baked or whatever for us, But so then after the war, the service years were over, we came back, and I went back to work for Ohio National as a stenographer. And then we lived in Mount Auburn for about a year. Then we moved back to Greenhills and up into a one-bedroom apartment right at the beginning of Flanders Lane. And my son was born there, and my daughter also. We had a one-bedroom apartment. And in fact, Rex Hoon, who was the football coach, he and his wife and son lived over on the other side of the building. And so then we moved into a two-bedroom apartment, a townhouse rather, right up the street. And then we were divorced, and I moved into this place with my two children, my son and daughter. And they went all the way through school here. And so then I forgot. In high school also, I went to work for Dr. Broughton, the dentist, as a dental assistant. He taught me how to do that. Or I guess his day dental assistant taught me how to do this. And I worked for him on Saturdays and 2 nights a week. And so when I was in California, there was, with my husband, there was a shortage of jobs. All the wives were trying to get jobs. But there were not many who knew how to be a dental assistant. So I went to work for a couple of dentists out there, and that's the kind of work I did when I was out there. So when I came back, and after I had worked again as a stenographer at Ohio National, then when we moved back to Greenhills, I went to work as a dental assistant for Dr. Broughton again.
So exciting. Done so many amazing things. What was it about Greenhills that made you want to come back after having been to California and then Mount Auburn?
Well, I really liked California, and the climate is wonderful. We were not very far from the beach. We spent all of our time on the beach or traveling around California, but there aren't any trees. Like we have when they have what they call a forest. It's not like our forest at all. And we were rather homesick, so we just, came back with family mostly. They brought you back.
I understand. Well, going back to sort of when you were living here in Greenhills, so can you think about the different types of people that lived in Greenhills? Like, who were your friends or your neighbors?
Oh, okay. Well, the good part of it was all of us were very much alike because, of course, there was you couldn't live here if you earned too much. You couldn't live here if you earned too little. Mm-hmm. So we were all pretty much alike. And so there was no, competition about being well-dressed or anything like that. The only competition was whether or not you could afford penny loafers or saddle Oxfords. And so, but my best friend was another student who was also a bus student. Well, when I first started in the first grade, and then along about when the time I was in the third grade, they took into the building the students that had been going to a one-room school out where Forest Park High School is now. Mm-hmm. And those students were then came into our building. And then when I was about in the 5th or 6th grade, they took in a one-room school that was down in Finneytown, right around the place where the Catholic Church is now. In fact, one of the buildings is still there. It was a 2-building school. They had the kitchen and activities room in one building and the school in the other. And those were the kids that lived on Fleming Road. So that was the girl that I became best friends with. And I'm still in contact with her.
Wonderful. What about other people that lived? So you said you lived on the farm, so all of your neighbors were also farmers? You mentioned that you guys were all very similar as far as like financial purposes, but were there any other sort of like religious differences or anything like that amongst your friends or neighbors and things like that?
No, not really. Well, they started the churches in the community building, of course, because they weren't built, they didn't build those when they built Greenhills. And so I don't know which came first, if it was the Presbyterian Church or if it was the Catholic Church. But and I don't remember exactly what years those were built, but there were really no religious differences. The only religious thing I remember is a lot of times when a student got to be after the 8th grade, they then went to Roger Bacon. Mm. And I don't think the girls really went anywhere at that time, but the boys sometimes did. I know my best friend was a very devout Baptist, and I remember going to church with her one time to watch baptism, which was kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that there were differences between what you got to do with your friends versus what some of the boys went and did after school or anything like that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, there would be a lot of differences there, I suppose. But Not for the farm kids, I don't think, because they all had work to do.
Right, you guys all had to get home.
Right. And then we came in the last bus in the morning. In other words, the bus route was divided into two parts. The kids that got to go on the early bus, who got picked up earliest, they also left school earliest at night. And so we got to leave late in the morning, but we also were the last ones to leave at night. So we were at school waiting for the bus to pick us up. I don't know about how long it would have taken, probably 45 minutes to an hour, I suppose. And we waited in the back there. And Mr. Woodry, who was one of the farmers, he was the bus driver. And I don't know how old my sister was, probably 6, probably. Anyhow, the bus came up in the parking lot in the back, and it was gravel at that time. Well, the little kids particularly always ran for the bus. Well, my sister ran for the bus, but she slid and fell, and her foot went under the wheel of the bus. And all the skin was taken off the side of her foot, and all the gravel was ground into it. And so they took her to the hospital, and they had to pick all that out, you know. She was there for, I think it was a month probably. I know she had to learn to walk all over again when she came home, but I remember Mr. Woodry felt so bad about that. And he also had 3 daughters. And a couple of times when Mom and Dad wanted to visit my sister in the hospital, he would take us over to his house, and we'd have dinner over at his house, and they would take care of us until my mom and dad got home again. And the other thing that we had too on the farm was a more than one person on the line on the telephone. We didn't have a phone when we first got there, but we did, later on. So that's how a lot of the people kept in contact was through the party line. The party line.
So you've also mentioned too this sort of like relationship that you had with Cincinnati, but it sounded like it was kind of difficult to get downtown, short of having to take multiple buses. So did you really only go down a couple times?
When I was growing up, probably. Mm-hmm. And then of course we had school trips. Mm-hmm. We went to the art museum. We went to the symphony. We went to the theater that showed art. Showed movies in Clifton. What is the name of that? Not the Esquire, is it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Went there. That's about the only. Oh, and then of course we could ride buses to the football games and basketball games. We did that, and then. But when Greenhills was built, it was never meant for the people that lived here to have cars, because the men, for the most part, worked in Cincinnati, so they would all ride the bus. It wasn't until later on that people started having, each individual place would have their own car, and then I don't think anybody ever had more than one car. Mm-hmm. So they'd have what garages you see around now, but then they also had garage compounds, which would be rows of garages that you drove back into, and you had, but those have all disappeared and been developed into housing. So that's why we have such a terrific problem with traffic and places to park around here now, because almost everybody has 2 cars instead of 1. And so, but anyway, as far as getting out of, that was a problem for the community. They recognized that they needed to have something for the teenagers to do. And so that's why they had movie nights. And then they tried to have a teen place for them to go. Of course, being on a farm, I didn't participate too much in that. But we did have things like the farmer's market and the pool. So the hangouts were the pool for the most part in the summertime. And then we always had the 4th of July Fireman's Carnival. And that was always a fun thing to go to because it was held in the back of the shopping center where the farmer's market usually it was. And at that time, the last store in the line of the shopping center was where the grocery store is now. Then there was nothing until you got to the gas station at the corner. There was just a row of poplar trees there. And then there was a slope there. So you could sit on the hillside there and watch this carnival, and we had such a great time with that. Then they moved it down to when that got to be too crowded. And so they moved then the fireworks down to Harbor Point in Winton Woods when that was built. And then they moved them up to where the American Legion is. And so then you could sit on the hillside up there and watch them. And all the traffic would be going by. All these fireworks would be going on overhead. Everybody parked across the street or down, you know. But that when they had that sort of thing, it was a lot of fun. But actually, we didn't have anything like kids have nowadays. You did. For one thing, we didn't have television. We only had radio at first. And you had your favorite radio programs that you would listen to. And my mom wouldn't let us listen to any soap operas during the day. On Sunday, you had gospel music or, you know, symphony kind of music, that sort of thing is what you would do. But you visited with your family. You went to visit other members of your family, or you had picnics at your home.
Did you have family that lived in other places besides Greenhills? Where were they located?
My uncle lived down on Winton Road, where Finneytown is. And I had an uncle that lived in Mount Healthy, an aunt that lived in North College Hill. My grandmother and grandfather lived in Pennsylvania when I was growing up because my grandfather was involved with another type of planned community that the government sponsored called Norvelt. It was a combination of Eleanor Roosevelt and her last name Roosevelt. And it was built about 5 years ahead of Greenhills. And it was to provide work for unemployed coal miners and steel workers. And they were giving plots of land 3 to 5 acres. And they built 4 to 5 room houses and a garage and a chicken house and a grape arbor. Then they also had a dairy farm, a factory. I forget what the other kind of factory was that they had. They had two different factories, and the dairy, and that was their experiment with trying to put people back to work before they had the concept of Greenhills, which Greenhills had the concept of a shopping center in the center, and then people went to work in a city, and then you had the farms around the rather than them sponsoring and running the farms themselves. So it was a different kind of thing. When we first moved here, my dad worked for the WPA planting the trees in Greenhills. And then he also worked as a custodian in the school in the evenings a lot of times.
Got all sorts of exciting things going. So it sounds like you have sort of this on and off relationship with Greenhills. So did you notice at all growing up if there was any sort of I guess like political issues going on in Greenhills at all? Like, did you notice if people were divided, or is there any like election that sticks out in your mind at all?
Well, not divided exactly. I noticed that there was a preference for people to live those who live west of Winton Road were thought that they lived in a better area than the ones who lived east of Winton Road, because there were more individual homes west and more apartments east. And then the rest of Greenhills had not been developed, it was just the streets were there. And then as far as the farms go, I didn't notice a whole lot of difference. I'd often go with my dad when he delivered eggs to different places. But I never had any problem with any of the kids from the Greenhills area itself. We were all just really friendly with each other. There wasn't any controversy or anything like that I can recall among us. And the only controversy there was when the government wanted to sell Greenhills. They wanted to sell it to the people that lived in the buildings in the town. Well, the farmers wanted to buy their places also. Okay. And we formed a group to kind of lobby the government for that. Right, we joined with the village to do this, but and we had lots of meetings, lots of writing to our representatives. But in the end, the government decided to sell the farms to two individuals, and that's how Forest Park got built. And then after after I came back to Greenhills after the Korean War, my children were in, they started at Damon Road School, and then they went to the White Building, and then they went over to the high school. Well, Forest Park, when it was built, didn't have a school, so those children came to Greenhills. So that made our children have half days. So that's how they worked that out until they finally got their school built. And that caused a controversy. There was a controversy because there were a lot of people who didn't want it divided between Forest Park and Greenhills. They wanted to keep Greenhills, their Greenhills school. And it was really a sad day when they decided not to do that.
Interesting. So another thing that we've sort of heard from folks is the history with Greenhills, of how it was sort of based on like a cooperative or more like socialist type principles. How do you think that affected people's lives at all? Were they really into that concept, or?
Well, they may have been at the beginning, but as it turned out, it didn't last. So obviously it didn't work. There was the grocery store was the cooperative, and the meat locker, I remember that, went on for a long time. And I guess there were other areas too, but we didn't have as much in the way of that as probably some of the other communities did. And then, because everything that eventually turned into the capitalistic type of system. Although it had been tried, it just didn't sustain itself for some reason. And I really wasn't into that at the time, so I didn't really pay attention to it. I just know it didn't last. And but anyway, it was such an ideal place to live. When I was raising my children here, they would go out the door in the morning. I never knew where they were. They were down in the woods playing cowboys and Indians. They were at each other's homes. They come home for lunch. They go back out again. You never worried about them at all. And it was just an ideal life. Your neighbors were, just great to be with. We'd have morning coffees, with all our neighbors. And really, the police were very friendly. All the community leaders were friendly. I always say it, Greenhills was just an ideal place to raise children. In fact, when I was in school, we only had one police person. And if you got sick at school, he would take you home. You never thought of him as somebody to be feared in any way at all. That's just the way it was.
Was there ever anybody that you noticed that didn't embrace the community idea? They weren't as sort of open and welcome to having, like how you said, like morning coffee? Was there ever anybody that didn't like the community feeling? They kind of wanted to be on their own at all?
Well, there were always some people who were more reserved,
Mm-hmm.
and you kind of respected them for that. You didn't, that was not a problem. No, I don't think there was, because we all lived so close together. There was no point in being too reserved, because
you all had to participate with each other anyway. Right?
Exactly. Yes. Well, you had to, a lot of times, call on each other too to babysit or to help out.
Work with everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So another thing that we've sort of learned about Greenhills is, so it was all purposefully planned.
Right.
There's all this sort of urban planning. Do you think that like the plan of the city was used as it was intended? Did you use the pedestrian walkways, or were there things that you guys did to alter the original plan at all? Just through use over time? Or was there anything you didn't like about the plan? Something you wish they had done differently?
No, can't say it as
That's fine.
I did. I think they had the little pocket playgrounds for the children.
Mm-hmm.
Those were always great things. Then they had the walkway that went from the school through the woods and out onto where Andover is. They eventually abandoned that, but that was always a neat walkway to go through there. Of course, the kids had made paths through all the woods anyway. There was nothing that was ever, off limits. And no, and like I said, the pool was great.
Mm-hmm.
The shopping center, I remember they had Gill's Hardware, not Hardware, variety store.
Mm.
And he was just, the kids just, loved him. Everybody loved him. He had anything you would want. He was the friendliest person.
Mm-hmm.
The hardware store was another local person.
Mm-hmm.
And he had anything you needed for these buildings, which unfortunately are unique.
Mm-hmm.
The parts that you can't get anywhere else, that person would have them. And what I did realize later on was these buildings were built in an experimental way. The construction of them was different than any other buildings they had done before, and I guess that was done deliberately. It was a good venue to be able to experiment and not have to lose any money because the government was paying for it. And so, I mean, we had unique windows. We had the kind of construction where where the walls were made, the air was supposed to flow in an envelope all the way around. The density of the walls, I mean, you cannot drive a nail into these walls. You have to use a screw. And so as a consequence, they're fairly soundproof on their own. Well, the only thing that really was a problem was the flat roofs. The ones who had flat roofs never, ever conquered those. They always eventually had to put hip roofs on them.
Did you like the international style of architecture, like while you were growing up or when you moved back, or did you prefer a different look to your house?
There was a time when we thought they all looked like barracks. Especially before any of them were allowed to be painted, and it would rain, they'd all turn brown. Because these are all coated with asbestos boards. And so it's asbestos coated with a paper coating on the outside. And for a long time, when the owners bought their own places, they did not want to paint them. And I remember when we came back to Greenhills after the war, we wanted to rent one of the townhouses, but the owner he didn't want to paint the building. So, but now, of course, they're all painted now. But I liked it that it's now become a designated historical village, because I don't like for it to be changed too much. I've tried not to change mine too much. We all replaced our windows, unfortunately. Those windows were wonderful when we had them because you could leave them open in any kind of rain or anything, and it didn't rain in. And but they because they were made of iron, they eventually rusted, and they were awful to paint. They were awful to clean. You had to use a toothbrush on them. And so we all eventually had to replace all the windows, but other than that, they are not. They stood the test of time. I mean, when I go into the library at the community building now, and I just marvel at how good that building looks after all those years. That it's when we're now replacing Forest Park High School.
Right. You get it built to last. So you mentioned a little bit of the Korean War with your husband, but going back just one more step, did you notice, did World War II affect Greenhills at all?
Oh yeah. In fact, we had in school little booklets you could buy for a penny. A dime, a stamp, which would help the war effort. So they did that in schools. There was gasoline rationing, and they had stamps for that. And the farmers got more gasoline, of course, because they needed it for their equipment. There was, I remember you couldn't get nylon stockings. When I graduated from the 8th grade, I was wearing my grandmother's rayon stockings. And their tires, all that was everything was rationed. We were in a good position though because we lived on the farms, so we always had meat, we always had vegetables, because my mother canned all the time, and so we didn't really notice it too much. But we saved lead. Had these big balls of from gum wrappers, anything that had silver on it, put into balls, and it saved all us. Gave that all to the war effort. And then of course, there was always, my mother always listened to President Roosevelt's fireside chats on the radio. Everybody was into the war effort. In fact, down where Winton Lake is, the Army drilled their tanks down there over the hills before the lake was built. So we had maneuvers being performed down there that you could watch.
Did any men that you knew ended up going into the war effort?
No, we were younger then.
That's fine. And then another point that we have as well, so you mentioned the rationing. Did you ever remember any the blackout drills or any other preparations as a group at all?
I don't really remember the blackouts having to do anything like that along those lines.
Okay, so how about? Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Of course, I was 5, 6, 7. I was probably only about 9 years old at that time.
That's fine. So moving forward then, so what about the Cold War? Did that, for your family, any feelings about that, or the community here in Greenhills?
No, not really. I can't remember being particularly, well, of course I followed it all, especially when they wanted to put missiles in Cuba. But I don't remember the kind of angst that people feel nowadays, what the children feel nowadays, or at least I understand that they do. I don't know if they really do or not, but no, I can't really say that. I know that during World War II, my cousins went to war. One was in the Air Force, one was in the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
One came back shell-shocked. That affected the family then. But as far as the Cold War goes, I think our parents were more frightened of that, that sort of thing, because they knew what wars did more so than what we did. We were of the age when the Second World War was a childhood memory, actually.
Mm-hmm. But so you never felt like any, you said you didn't feel any, like, the anxiety or, like, the fear or anything like that. Do you think that was as a result of living here in Greenhills? Do you think if you lived someplace else it may have been different? Or just...
No, I think that feeling was probably, well, I can't say because I didn't live in other places, but I can't say what it would have felt like somewhere else.
That's fine. Did you know of any people that built bomb shelters at all, or thought about building bomb shelters?
Mm-mm.
So do you have any keepsakes from growing up in Greenhills? Things that you've kept or anything like that from growing up, or from when your kids lived here? Sort of certain things you think about?
I've got boxes.
Oh, okay.
Boxes of schoolwork and all that sort of thing. I've got an Indian head penny that I won, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Those are just normal, everyday type of memories, I think.
Is there anything that you miss about when you grew up in Greenhills versus living in Greenhills now?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my goodness. I said to my daughter the other day I would never want to bring up children in the world the way it is today. I mean, the kind of freedom that we had is disappeared. And I think, too, the kind of opportunities we had. Not everybody that graduated in my class was going on to college. I'd say that I would have considered those people the lucky ones who could do that. The rest of them went to work in industry or service industries, whatever. But they all felt that they was like once they were out of school, boy, the whole world was open to them. And now I don't think it isn't anymore. Now you have to have so much more education. You can't depend on things like your manual labor and all that kind of thing. Although now there's a shortage of things like plumbers and carpenters and all that. But we have to retrain the young people now to consider that a career. That was kind of labor was kind of looked down on. We were made to feel that you needed to go to college. You had to get a degree before you could earn a certain amount of money and support a family. And at that time, that wasn't true. We could do that.
Mm-hmm. Would you say, you said there's a difference between when you grew up and sort of now. What about between when you grew up here in Greenhills and when you raised your kids? Was there any differences at all? Do you feel any different? The things your kids got to do versus what you got to do? Well,
yeah, because there was a vast difference between how I grew up and how they grew up. Because, of course, I lived on the farm and was more isolated from village life than when they grew up here. They had friends going in and out the door all the time. They participated in all kinds of things. I mean, they were always gathering at one of those homes. They would go down to the lakes around the village and go ice skating. They'd, they were more mobile. They had their own transportation. They could go to Cincinnati. They could go to neighboring communities, and of course, at that time, all this area became built up with other communities expanding. So it was like a suburb then around Cincinnati, whereas before we were kind of isolated from Cincinnati. And and then of course I think they became much more social than what I was. So it was a very different type of upbringing.
I know we try to not focus on the negatives, but was there any downside you can think of about growing up in Greenhills or raising your kids in Greenhills?
Well, I don't think there was as far as raising my kids in Greenhills, but living as close as I really, after growing up on the farms, there was always a part of me that wanted a little bit more privacy than what you could achieve here in Greenhills. But here I am still.
Right. That's fine. So keeping a community, but having a little bit of space for yourself also.
Right, exactly.
That's fine. Earlier you mentioned because you were sort of like a farm daughter, there was a little bit of isolation with that. Was that like hard for you to deal with, or did being in school sort of make up for it?
It wasn't hard for me because I'm probably not as a very outgoing person anyway. And I don't know if it's a result of having been brought up on a farm, but I don't think so, because my sister is the opposite. And but I don't think it really bothered me at all.
Well, is there anything else that you would like to talk about or tell us that we haven't sort of like specifically asked you about? Any other fond memories or fun stories or anything like that?
I can't think of it.
It's fine, that's okay.
It's probably, after you leave, there'll probably be a lot of things. We still have lunch with an alumni group that is around, well, I guess myself and another lady are the oldest ones in the group, and then my sister, who is 3 years younger than I am, her group has quite a few involved in it. And we have about anywhere from 10 to 20 people that about every 6 weeks or so we have lunch together. We call ourselves the old fogies. And so, and we talk, and the talk always goes back to how we grew up in Greenhills. I mean, after we talk about our ailments, then we go back to talking about growing up in Greenhills. And the thing that has dropped off, for instance, the 4th of July parade. There was always a parade, and then we would always have a reunion of the different classes at that time. And we got hay wagons from the Handlebar Ranch. They would rent us wagons. So when we had our 50th reunion, I forget, about half of our class came back. Well, there were only 40 in the class to begin with. And we had our hay wagon, and we had our dinner at Sharon Woods, and we had our picnic the next day. And just talking to all the people that had been in our class was just such a treat. And keeping up with them now is such a treat, although unfortunately we've lost probably about half of them. But when I graduated, we had 20 boys and 20 girls. And really enjoyed the ones who stayed around Greenhills. We kept in contact with each other. You may remember, I don't know if anyone has mentioned, like Ron Otting, he was our mayor for a long time. He was one of our classmates. When he was growing up, he was kind of the class clown, along with his sidekick, Bill Slade. And then he turned out to be a very serious person and a teacher, too. And so, but other people you talk about when they lived, all the fun they had, the people that lived on Bronton Lane with their summer roasts and things. And but it was just a fun time, and I really enjoyed going to the football games and all the sports that my kids were involved in. Having become a single parent, I decided early on that I was going to have them involved in sports because it keep them out of trouble. And so going to these sports events with the parents of the other students was really good. And then organizing, I coached say soccer and softball rather, along with friends of mine that I had grown up with. That was a fun time, and that has all kind of disappeared now. Because a lot of the people who bought their own homes here, eventually they sold the homes or rented them to let their children rent them, and then they moved out to single family places somewhere else. Well, as their children then left, the whole village has changed. So there's very few of us left that are old timers. And so there's becoming fewer and fewer of us. So the whole flavor of the village has changed. And a lot of people try to keep it together, along those lines, but it's difficult to do in today's world.
One last question I had for you. So you mentioned a couple different times. So you raised your kids as a single parent. Do you think because of the type of environment Greenhills was that you had help in that? You had neighbors and you had friends?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
It's sort of a community effort, It takes
Right.
the village kind of thing.
Yeah, and I got involved a lot more with the community because of it.
All right, well, thank you so much for taking the time
Well, you're
to
welcome.
talk with us today. I really appreciate learning all this wonderful information.
Going down memory lane.
Yes, I hope you enjoyed too.
I did. I made a list here of all the things that I was going to talk about. And I don't know if I've covered them all now or not. So, but anyway, I was trying to remember as I went along, all the things that had happened to me all those years. But it was. I think that the life that I lived growing up on a farm has made me a very self-sufficient person. And so I wouldn't trade that for anything.
I don't think you should either. Well, thank you again so much.
You're welcome.